When I was creating this recipe, I wanted something that felt cozy, rustic and nourishing. Something that sounds like it came from a countryside kitchen rather than a factory. And that's where the name Lamb from the Hills came from. Lamb naturally fits that whole hillside pasture-raised feel, and I paired it with earthy ingredients like kale, barley and blueberries to create a recipe that feels hearty but still fresh. And honestly, this one smells so good while cooking that you might question whether you accidentally made dinner for yourself. So let's make it. First, we'll prep the vegetables. Start by finely chopping the kale. We don't need massive pieces here because dogs digest vegetables better when they are chopped smaller and lightly cooked. Then grate or finely dice the carrots. Next, roughly chop the peppermint. We are only using a tiny amount, but it adds freshness and works really nicely with lamb. Then rinse your blueberries and set those aside for later. Measure out your hemp seeds as well so they are ready to add at the end. And before we start cooking, make sure your barley is already cooked and ready to go. I usually cook it separately beforehand because barley takes much longer than the rest of the ingredients. Now onto the proteins. I'm using lamb chunks today, but lamb mince works really well too, if your dog prefers that texture. So if you're using chunks like me, cut them into smaller bite-sized pieces first. Then we have lamb heart, which is one of my favorite ingredients because it's rich in nutrients and naturally contains taurine and coenzyme Q10. I usually trim off any tougher bits and chop the heart into smaller pieces before cooking. And a small amount of lamb liver because liver is incredibly nutrient dense, but with organ meats, balance matters. I like finely chopping the liver so it mixes evenly through the recipe. I'm also adding sardines, which are an amazing source of omega-3 fatty acids. If you're using tin sardines, just make sure they are in spring water rather than oil or tomato sauce. You can break them up slightly with a fork before adding them in. And finally, a hard-boiled egg for extra nutrients, protein and choline. Once boiled, remove the shell and chop the egg into smaller pieces before mixing it through the food. Now for cooking. Add the lamb and lamb heart to a pan on low to medium heat. I'm lightly cooking this recipe rather than heavily frying it because we want to preserve as many nutrients as possible while still gently cooking the ingredients. Once the lamb is partially cooked, add the kale and carrots. Then stir through cooked barley. We only cook the vegetables briefly. The goal isn't to destroy them into mush. We just want them softened slightly to be easier to digest. At this stage, you can also add a little warm water if you want the recipe to have more of a casserole or stew-like texture. Some dogs naturally prefer meals with more moisture, and adding water can also help soften the barley even more and bring everything together into a more comforting bowl. You can keep it fairly thick or make it more stew-like depending on your dog's preference. Add liver and mix it through. Once everything is cooked, turn the heat off completely. Now we can add the sardines, chopped egg, blueberries and peppermint. Sprinkle in the hemp seeds. We are mainly using them here as a source of manganese, which can sometimes be one of the trickier minerals to provide consistently in homemade diets. And most importantly, let the food cool before adding Olli. This is because Olli contains carefully selected whole food ingredients and nutrients, and adding it after cooking helps protect heat-sensitive vitamins and compounds. Olli is designed to help fill nutritional gaps in homemade diets using whole food ingredients, helping bring recipes closer to complete and balanced nutrition without relying entirely on synthetic premixes. It's also one of the reasons I like using a variety of fresh ingredients in recipes like this. The food provides diversity, texture, and natural nutrients, while Olli helps support the areas that are often harder to achieve consistently with homemade feeding alone. You might also notice that we are using both Olli and Antli in this recipe rather than simply increasing the amount of Olli. Olli already contains antler powder, which contributes minerals like calcium and phosphorus, but with this recipe I preferred adding a little antler separately so we could support the calcium to phosphorus ratio without needing to use as much Olli overall. A lot of the other nutrients we want to support can still be covered with a smaller amount of Olli, so using antler alongside it can work out more economical for those of you who are making homemade meals regularly. Now, fair warning. Once you add Olli, the food will turn slightly green. And that's completely normal. It's mainly because of ingredients like spirulina. And honestly, some dogs absolutely love it. But if you'd rather the meal stayed looking as is, you can mix Olli with a little cold boiled water first to create a paste, then drizzle it over the top instead. Same nutrition, slightly less swamp casserole appearance. And that's lamb from the hills. Thanks for watching.